Welcome back to another episode of the MatStats Show, along with Glenn Gormley and Kevin Hazard. I'm Jason Bryant, and today we go back where I come from. We'll let Glenn talk about that here in a moment because he's always got to tie everything into Rocky Top and country music. And on the screen there, if you're watching on the video, image of Peyton Manning, which my stepbrother's uncle played football at Tennessee. We get it; it's cool. So before we get to that, we'll tie a little Tennessee into it right away. Former coach Gray Simons, the coach at Old Dominion when I was at that school in Norfolk, just celebrated his 84th birthday. I'm working on a podcast series through the Hall of Fame right now called Seven, which will document the career of Gray Simons and a wrestler who is often overlooked despite doing things that few wrestlers ever did before. So happy birthday to Coach Simons, a Virginia legend, a national legend, a two-time Olympian, three-time NCAA champion, four-time NAIA champion, and just all-around good dude. So Gray taught me a lot about wrestling when I was coming through, living down there on Hampton Boulevard. So that's the first thing I want to get to.
Yes, happy birthday, Coach Simons.
Yeah, because Glenn, you've known Gray, you got the Tennessee tie there.
Yeah, Gray was my coach at Tennessee, and he's one of the all-time greats of the sport and just a great man. And I've always looked up to Gray and was lucky to have him for a year.
Always joke that, as many times as, these stat shows, we talk about the things here, and people that call me and text me and email me about information like, oh, man, you know something. It's like, dude, Gray Simons farts more wrestling knowledge than I will ever know. So just not just his technical acumen, just the guy is a steel trap for technique. I mean, he is at 84 years old. He still goes in to the wrestling room down there at Great Neck Middle School, right by Cox High School, and we'll just go in and teach kids simple techniques that, tried and true. They work, simple hand position, just a master technician. So, it's always kind of an awe to sit there and actually see him in his element. And always been very low key, always been very humble, so to speak. So he's not a guy that if social media existed in Coach Simons' competitive era, he probably wouldn't have even had X, Twitter, Facebook, whatever you want to call him now. Matter of fact, he doesn't have it now. Mary has it. If you ever want to talk to Coach, you got to go through Mary. But next step, Glenn, we just finished up at the NWCA convention down in Fort Lauderdale. Had a deluge of content and a deluge of actual water. Glenn, let's give your impressions of what we saw down in Fort Lauderdale this year.
I thought it was an excellent convention. I believe the number was like 435 coaches there. I forget the exact number, but it was just a great thing. Mike Moyer, Dan Weaver, Nate Nas, Stephanie, Dr. Jackie, Beth Ann, they all did a great job. Joe Miller, Jim Fallis, they just did a great job putting it together. I was really happy to be there and be a part of it. I liked the way it's really come together. It's really bloomed into a big event. I look forward to it every year. And thank you, NWCA, for putting that on. And a special shout out to Dan Weaver, who basically did all the logistics of that thing. Great job by a young kid.
Yeah, and I'll be remiss if I didn't mention what Dr. Jackie Paquette had done with the coordination of the women's wrestling celebration. That was just absolutely moving. And I want to talk a little bit about that because women's wrestling is part of the topic today. We're going to talk about the college alliances and allegiances of our Olympians and world teamers for the last decade. But part of that from the NWCA celebration is, not just supporting women's wrestling, but supporting women in wrestling. Because for years we know that, before women were regular, coaches and regular athletes, there are places where, the legendary voice of wrestling, Sandy Stevens, a female announcer. Dort Mayab, my co-announcer at the NAIA championships and multiple USA wrestling events. She's been a woman in wrestling for a long, long time. Eve Duncan got a chance to speak. She's behind the scenes a lot, but she's forward-facing when it comes to things with the weight certification program and training people on track wrestling and Flow Arena. So it was more than just about wrestlers. And at one point, I was sitting next to a young woman who was the club coach or the club founder at Duke University, trying to get that women's wrestling club off the ground, and seeing her listen so intently to what Clarissa Chun was speaking about. Clarissa coming through, won the very first high school state tournament and the very first state to sponsor wrestling at the very first weight class. So she was a true leader when it comes to high school wrestling. in terms of its sanctioning, and just watching her hanging on what Clarissa was saying is you've got an athlete that came through breaking down barriers, and an athlete that looked like her and that had the same dreams and desires, and then being able to see your hero speak. It was just something that I took a step back and kind of, was removing myself from the situation, just kind of taking it all in. And it's like our women, our daughters, our nieces, our, granddaughters. I don't have granddaughters. I don't think, thankfully, I've got daughters right now. But this generation of our wrestling community, their heroes are now speaking to them. They're, for years they were side by side with their heroes, not realizing maybe the impact of the situation, or maybe they were. But to sit there and just sit next to these, and the Rutgers our club founder was also sitting there too. So watching them, watch Clarissa speak, and then have Eve up there speak, and Dort emceeing everything, and then a great speech from an athlete from the United States Marine Corps. It was well done. And again, it wasn't just supporting women's wrestling. It's supporting women in wrestling, whether it be, they're your athletic director who is very favorable to wrestling, or you're like at Life University, your AD, or your school president at Utah Valley, who is very, adamant about supporting the wrestling program there out in Utah. So it's more that it's the pairing officials, the mat officials, the tournament directors, the announcers. It's everything, the administrators, everything that goes along with what we know about the sport of wrestling was on display. And Dr. Paquette, who I've known since 2009, the NCAA Division II championships, when she was working at the University of Indianapolis, just putting that together and showcasing the sport beyond just celebrating the heroes of wrestling, but celebrating the heroes of wrestling. So that was one thing that really kind of got me in the feels. And, I remember texting Dort Mayab, she's emceeing, and I'm like, this is freaking awesome. So that was one thing I definitely got out of the convention, that it was a big, big moment, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jason. And I forgot to mention Kerry Regner there. He did a great job too. But as far as Dr. J, I like calling her Dr. J because of my Philly heritage.
Originally a Virginia Squire, by the way.
Yes, correct. And UMass before that.
Hampton Coliseum.
Hampton Coliseum.
So
Sorry.
If you would have told people 10 years ago that Saturday night, the big event at our convention, would be about women in wrestling, most people would not have believed you on that. Yet, a few weeks ago, basically the closing night was all about women in wrestling, and it was so very well done. I know Dr. J's the one who put all that together, and it was just a great job by all the speakers. Clarissa Chung, Lori Ayres, one of our former guests, she gave the closing remarks. Her remarks are beautiful. It's really good to see this in the sport.
Yeah, fantastic. So, moving to our topic today, MatStats episode 23, Back Where I Come From. And Glenn, you're going to have to set this up because I was listening to the song beforehand. Like, what, you tie in song lyrics, you love Seeger. Now you've again, tied it into Rocky Top. What the heck's going on here?
Okay, here we go, guys. There's a famous country song, Back Where I Come From. And I thought it was fitting. It talks all about Kenny Chesney, back where he comes from. And he's from this area, Knoxville, East Tennessee. So one time at a concert here about 7 years ago, he was playing at Neyland Stadium. And he asked the crowd if he could bring out a guest to help him sing Back Where I Come From. And sure enough, his guest was none other than Peyton Manning, which is the biggest guest you could possibly bring back to Neyland Stadium, except if you brought General Neyland back. So that's where it is. And it just,
that, right?
Yeah,
that would be.
Yeah, you can't be. Yeah. It's just about back where I come from. And this show is about these wrestlers that you know from the World Games and the Olympics, basically where they're from with the colleges they went to. And that's what the topic of this show is. And it's always such a big thing. Whenever you see an NFL draft, it'll say, and I'll use the example since we talked about him, number one pick in the draft from University of Tennessee is Peyton Manning, quarterback. Okay, so they always mention that. So, okay, so
I'm going to jump ahead. Before we do, Glenn, you mentioned Lori Ayres here on the screen. I've got my Burn the Ships, my Princeton wrestling shirt on today. So
okay, great.
I didn't go orange Rocky Top, but I went orange for Princeton. So
well, I love the orange on. I got a shirt on about, the multi-divisional duels on. Okay. I do need to say the opinions expressed on this show are not necessarily reflected by the NWCA, or nor do we always agree. Glenn, Jason, and Kevin agree with each other blah, blah, blah. You guys get it from the past.
Because Hazard's
Okay.
full of crap. But Kevin
Well,
Hazard, on the other
well.
hand, he's okay.
Oh, okay. You
Ah.
caught me. You
All
caught me.
right. That's good. That's good. Okay. So on to slide 4. Okay, guys. The 2023 World Wrestling Championships are September 16th to 24th in Belgrade, Serbia. None other than Jason Bryant is going to be one of the main announcers. Okay. And since this is the international season, since the World Championships are coming up, okay, we are going to switch our gear. It's normally a college thing to international. And for anybody who's watched ESPN and their prime time since 1987, Chris Berman and for a long time Tom Jackson would famously say, Chris Berman would go from, and Jackson would say Louisville. Anybody who played for Louisville, because they'd always talk about what colleges people went to. Okay, and that was part of their famous.
This is one of my favorite shows growing up because as before we had satellite, before we had instant access, I grew up in Virginia, Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan, which in the 80s was very, very grim. Many losing 10 loss seasons.
Awful.
So
Awful.
the only chance I'd ever get to see Tampa Bay was the one game a year that they would play on national television because I believe the contracts were allowed. You had to have one game that was out of market or something like that. So I got to see the Bucs one time, usually losing to the Detroit Lions and Barry Sanders, where I have chills. They never played on Thanksgiving, oddly enough. But then, so my only chance to see highlights was NFL primetime. So you're speaking my language here, Glenn. This was my childhood when it comes to that network.
Oh, yeah.
So and thing is this line is also it's moved into popular culture because people would be like, hey, Jordan Burroughs from, and you don't even have to set it up. People would just go Nebraska. That's the type of thing that people do. This show and that line with TJ and Boomer were just like, you can say it, Kevin Hazard from
William and Mary.
William Mary.
To say, yeah. Keystone College.
Keystone College.
Yeah, throwing that one out there. So Glenn,
Yeah.
I love when you're referencing the Tom Jackson, Chris Berman here from prime time, or anytime Dion would be on there because they'd go prime time. Anyway, we're not talking about Coach Prime at Colorado. They don't have wrestling. Moving on.
Yeah, they don't have wrestling there. All right, so this episode covers the Worlds and Olympics from 2014 to 2023. Okay, the reason we did a smaller window here is because the advent of women's college wrestling is a recent phenomenon. Okay, and we want this show to be as balanced as possible with women and men. Okay, a future show, we might go back all the way the USA has performed all the way back to the 1904 Olympics in St. Louis. Jason Bryant, as always, put together an amazing spreadsheet for me to do some deep dive into stats for another show. But this show was on the last 10 years and where they went to school. Okay, so to start with all that, okay, we're going to start with the women here, guys. I know we usually start with the men. We're throwing a curveball at people. The most common college that the people who went to the World and the Olympics is Simon Fraser, which ironically is in Canada, and King University here in Bristol, Tennessee. Okay. So then we have, they're tied for first. Then we have the rest of them on there, guys, as you can see, Missouri Valley, Campbellsville, Wayland Baptist, Northern Michigan, Lindenwood, Oklahoma City U, McKendree, Missouri Baptist, Jamestown, Iowa, and University of the Cumberlands. And then there's a College of the Cumberlands close by that's in Tennessee. University of Cumberlands is in Kentucky. They're two different schools. One's NAIA, one's NCAA. And I had a women's wrestling match, but they have a team announced. Okay. And this chart here on slide 23-6, that, for example, if somebody made more than one team, they're counted more than once.
Right.
Okay. Now,
I also want to point out a nuance to this, Glenn, too, when it comes to Northern Michigan. Northern Michigan now currently has a women's collegiate wrestling team, but in this era where a lot of the athletes coming through, they would go to Marquette, Michigan. Shannon Gillespie is now the coach at Lakeland University, and a women's coach at Lakeland University, was the developmental coach at the U.S., what was then known as the U.S. Olympic Education Center at Northern Michigan, where they had Greco-Roman and women's freestyle. So a lot of the athletes would come through. They'd graduate from Marquette High School in Marquette, Michigan, which is cold. It's up on the UP. and they'd go there for their senior year, get assimilated into that lifestyle of that international style wrestling, and then they'd be at Northern Michigan with their Olympic education program. Now, there were times where Northern Michigan would put teams together that compete at the WCWAs or the Women's College Nationals before they actually became the WCWA. And at one point, the national duels in Cedar Falls, they were actually in the early years of the women's tournament of Cedar Falls. So this Northern Michigan, it will not be looked at as the same as the new Northern Michigan program that has been launched. And another point about Simon Fraser, just for distinction, Canadian school, Burnaby, British Columbia, out near Vancouver. They were in what was the Canadian version of the NCAA, even though they're in the NCAA now, which was then called the CIS. Now it's called U Sport. So they had men's and women's wrestling at Simon Fraser. The men's team is Division II. The school, when it moved from Canada's U Sport to the NCAA, their women's team basically became WCWA eligible, at least in the eyes of that foundation. So a couple distinctions when it comes to how some of these schools are looked at. But Simon Fraser had a program before they even came in to the NCAA. And if you look at the Canadian world teamers that are from Simon Fraser, that number is pretty impressive as well. They've got world champs, and that was also what made it enticing for our women to go north of the border to compete with such a rugged program coached by Mike Jones and Justin Abdu. So little touch of knowledge there for you on Simon Fraser. They are now the Red Leafs. They had a nickname change, so they are the Red Leafs of Simon Fraser University.
Okay, well, thank you. I did not know that. And I have actually been to Northern Michigan for a college football game, so I have seen their facility up there at the Superior Dome. Okay, next slide shows if you made a team more than once, you only count one time on the slide. So it's the amount of unique individuals that have been there. Once again, Simon Fraser tied for the top on that. Kevin, weigh in some on this for us, please, on the women's side of things.
I guess, first of all, I like your explanation. So if you look at the two slides, you got Simon Fraser with 4 unique, 15 total, and that means you've got a lot of those they had to all be 3 and 4 timers. That's how you can have a 15 total Olympians and 4 unique. So they've had 4 Olympians that have been on 3 or 4 world teams. And another thing that we kind of skipped over, I see Iowa's got an asterisk, and the asterisk is because they haven't wrestled a match yet, but they have an Olympian because it's a brand new. And Jason was talking.
They got a world teamer. This is World and Olympics. So
yeah, well, I'm sorry, World and Olympic. And
correct.
Clarissa Dunn is the coach there, and Jason was talking about her. And she's done one heck of a job putting together a team. I mean, they're going to come out of the chute, a team to be reckoned with.
Yeah, the one wrestler, the world teamer there they have is Kylie Welker, who was on the world team in Oslo 2021. So one of those early commits. So actually at that point, she was still committed. She wasn't actually attending Iowa yet. So pretty interesting in how just the rush of athletes have come through. But and what's also you see here is you see a mix of schools. You're like, some of these schools are not name schools when it comes to the men's wrestling side. For our fans that may pay attention more to the men's side of things than the women's side of things, Missouri Valley, for example, is one of the basically I don't know if there's a term charter member of women's wrestling colleges, but they are one of the first 3. So, AD Mike Mockholtz, and it was their longtime men's coach, started the program. So Missouri Valley is there. King has been a program since I want to say around 2010. And so, Jamestown's had a program for a bit. But, Lindenwood and Missouri Valley are 2 of the oldest schools on this list, as is University of the Cumberland. So a lot of that came through. And King started as an NAIA school and reclassified to Division II. Missouri Valley still in the NAIA. Lindenwood also was an NAIA school, reclassified there to Division II. Then they reclassified to Division I. University of Cumberland still in the NAIA. So a lot of growth from our women's wrestling, which you will see here from the NAIA, really. And now the blossoming into the Division III schools everywhere, like North Central College, for example, which will be a contender with Iowa for next year's National Collegiate Women's Wrestling Championships.
And I think, and again, going back to Iowa, I think it's interesting. That's really the first D1 program and
Power Five.
Power five.
well,
Yeah, first Power Five.
Power Five.
We've got
Pardon me,
four
yeah.
D1s, but they're the
First
first
large,
Power Five. Yeah.
Big Ten type school, and I think we saw this. If we went back and looked at women's basketball, you saw the same thing. And it was small schools across the country, and then it started to get very popular, it started to get big, and then the bigger schools got into it, and now the bigger schools dominate. So I don't know if that's a trend that will follow, but I'm not going to be surprised if that happens.
Okay. All right, guys. Now we're moving on to the men's side of things. Okay. And as Kevin just said, the women's side are schools that you might not see on ESPN game day where the men's side is, the bigger Power Five schools. Okay. The school with the most World Olympians in the last 10 years is Nebraska. And of course, that's because Jordan Burroughs from Nebraska.
Nebraska.
Okay.
And New Jersey.
Yeah. Yeah. Made
James
so many
Green from
Nebraska.
Yeah.
New Jersey. Yeah. So we got them both there. Burroughs and Green really carrying the flag for Go Big Red there.
Yeah. So anyway, guys, and of course, number 2 is the Ohio State. And I'm always trying to say the Ohio State and not just Ohio State, since that's what they want to be go by. But as you can see on this slide, the top part is dominated by Big Ten schools, and you have Cornell in there. And then you do have some smaller schools after that, which is really good to see. Then the next slide shows you the uniqueness of it. For example, Burroughs only counts one time, and Kyle Snyder only counts one time, etc. How about this, guys? Cornell, a little Ivy League school, is tied for the most on that with 3. That's a great
Right.
thing. Aruja, Yanni D, and of course Kyle Dake. That is just a great thought, guys. That what we're seeing here, guys, is there's more than one way to slice this onion, right? Peel back the onion. I mean, some people just think, well, you got to be from a big time school. No, certainly not in women. And a lot of times in men, they're not from these big Power 5 schools. Okay. Now, the next slide. Women go to private colleges, men go to public colleges. Okay. Basically, you can see the numbers there, but it's basically 3/4 private school for women and 85% public for men. It's a big difference. Whether that changes over time, who knows? But there's not one right way or one wrong way to do that, guys. Kevin and Jason weigh in on that.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at it, and I think kind of hit on it a little earlier. The private schools for women, that's where the programs were. And I think as it grows, and again, we just saw our first Big 5 school get in. I think it's going to grow. I think that number, I would think, anything could happen, but I would think that they would start to be more prevalent as the years go on. It'll take a couple years, but I mean, it's growing leaps and bounds. It's not growing as big on the sport's growing on the D3 and D2 level. I think the women's are going to grow as much on the D1 level as the D2 and D3 as it goes on. I have no statistics to back that up. I'm just trending. I think that's going to happen.
It's a stat show. Kevin brings no stats. Yeah. Now, one thing that's also important, you bring this up, is that the enrollment situation at colleges, it's not just these schools need male enrollment, which is where you saw a lot of the NAIs and D3s bringing back or starting men's programs. But now when they're adding men and women at the same time, they need students entirely. I mean, we've had, other than that school in Norfolk and that school in the Fresno Valley, the Central Valley, the number of programs we're losing at the college level is actually, it's dwindled to a crawl. The programs we're losing is because schools are closing. A lot of them now, we just saw Alderson Brodus in West Virginia announce that they're going to be shutting down. The West Virginia State Legislature or whoever said, you can't offer degrees anymore. You're suspending everything. You're suspending athletics, and you are going to no longer offer degrees. So we've seen other schools shut down. Urbana shut down. Ohio Valley University shut down. So we're seeing losses at those schools, and the reason some of these schools are even there is okay, we've got 50, 60% of their student body are athletes because sports are a way to keep tuition dollars coming in and keep some of these small schools afloat. And wrestling has actually been kind of a leader in that regard when you add men's and women's wrestling to the equation. A lot of them are small, private, liberal arts colleges that have a pretty big sticker price. So you get somebody on a half ride, but it costs them 50 grand, 60 grand a year, being very kind of liberal with that number. It's going to help move the bottom line of the entire school, keep the doors open. So wrestling has been an opportunity not just for people love the sport and they're just adding it there. No, it's also a way to keep doors open, keep enrollment there, men and women. It's not just we're adding wrestling for men's enrollment. We're adding wrestling for enrollment in total. And then they're also saying the NCAA has listed it as an emerging sport. The NAI has it as a championship sport. Oh, we don't have to take a chance on this anymore because you look around, there's over 160 more women's opportunities than there were 20 plus years ago. So now there's an opportunity for you to wrestle regionally. There's still some gaps in the geography of who needs to wrestle who, but the options when you start a women's team, your first hurdle's hiring a coach. Your second hurdle's recruiting a team. Your third isn't much of a hurdle anymore. Who are you going to wrestle? You got a lot of options now. So the enrollment is a big part, and that is a big part why the private school numbers are so much more dramatic than the public schools here. I hope the public state schools that don't have enrollment issues are looking to say, hey, we need to add women's wrestling because we need to be nationally competitive. We need to find something that's our niche to be nationally relevant. Like you alluded to, Kevin, the Delta States and the Immaculatas don't exist in women's college basketball anymore. They're the Notre Dames, the Tennessees, the UConns, the Baylors. Those are the schools that are at the top of the NCAA women's basketball pecking order because now they've got money behind them. Even Iowa, LSU with that huge viewership. So
Oh, yeah.
gone are the days of Delta State and Immaculata on big-time women's college basketball. And right now, you've still got an opportunity for a school like King University to be like, yeah, we've got Olympians here. That's a draw for a school like that. And it will always be a draw for a school like that.
I wonder that something, and I just thought about this. I wonder if RTCs will also start to factor in for women. Like we have for, the men's. Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with the kind of the centralizing of talent in the Big Ten. They've got those great RTCs. I think once that starts to become more prevalent, the women, maybe that'll change the dynamics for women wrestling too. It's for the Olympic level.
Got to have the money for the RTCs. Yes. That's another thing too, and now the NIL. But I think those are another side tangents.
Yeah,
Glenn, where do we go from here?
Okay, where do we go from here, guys? On slide 11, we can see that of all the men that we know of on the Olympic and world team last 10 years have wrestled for a college, only 3/4 or 75% of the women have. Okay. Jason, you know far more about this than Kevin or I do about how this works, how they train there. Please brief us on this.
So as Glenn and I were talking about off air before we started, our sample size for this group of 10 years is very limited. In some years we have 7 weights, some years we have 8, some years we have 10 now because of the growth of the world championships and whatnot. So, you could have one athlete. In this case, the women's athlete that really impacts this most is Adeline Gray with the number of world teams and Olympic teams she's been on. And that is like, okay, that's a big number. It's not a unique athlete. It's one unique athlete, but it's a big number of those spots. So she didn't opt to go the King University route, or, she went to Northern Michigan for her senior year as a high school student, actually graduated back in Colorado, but she didn't take the traditional collegiate women's route. Part of that is because some of those senior level athletes that are having success already. I mean, she was on a world team at 7. I think she was on a world team at 17 years old, and the development and the developmental athletes, not used negatively here. The women's pipeline is being developed in college, just like the men are, but it's being developed in freestyle. So if you're a high level senior athlete, you're really not going to get a whole lot of wrestling in college if you're already on the world level. That's changing. You're seeing a Kylie Welker's made a world team. She's now at Iowa. We've seen world teamers and junior world champions going to college versus saying training center. So wrestlers like Adeline, Elena Pirshkova, they're going to go with the Olympic Training Center, which has a built-in national team network, dorm beds, things like that. So there was an elite senior level training situation for women's wrestling coming out of high school ready to go. Some of them would use the Northern Michigan USOEC before going to the training center. But Adeline, for example, is the outlier that kind of skews this data. Now, she did get a college degree, but she didn't do it in the way she didn't do it in the brick and mortar classroom at King University or University of Jamestown or Simon Fraser. She did it at UCCS and in online classes and at DeVry. So there's a couple different places that athletes that are at the training center have ways to get their college degree. So this doesn't mean they didn't attend college. This just means they didn't wrestle in college. So that's kind of an athlete that kind of does skew the women's numbers because the Olympic Training Center has always been an option since they started funding that thing with an Olympic coach and Terry Steiner starting out. The '02 is, I think, when he got hired. So he's over 20 years out there. So that has been the option that the men usually don't partake in until after they finish their college careers because they have a full geared up scholarship offering Division I, system that gave them 19,000 people to watch them wrestle for 3 days in March. So women aren't there yet, but that's why the data looks like it does, is because the women have had the OTC option at a younger age to go compete for senior world teams at a younger age. You'll see the average age of our Olympic and world teamers is less than those college athletes. Now, granted, you got college athletes like Snyder and those folks winning medals in college, but again, those are more the exceptions than they are the rules, at least as of 3 years ago. So that's where we stand with how the women work.
Thank you for that, Jason. That was a good synopsis of that. Okay, and Jason, you just covered the next slide on that too when you were talking. So go down to slide 13, and this is where these colleges are. Okay, and when I use the word footprint in there, since none of these schools that the women come from for the Worlds and the Olympians are in any of these 1A conferences, I just basically use the footprint. Just to let everybody
What's
know.
What's your Big Ten footprint right now? The lower 48? Because the way college realignment's gone.
Yes. It's so funny, Jason, you say that because I was thinking about that. So
the traditional footprint before Oregon and Washington were thrown in there.
Everyone joined the Big Ten. I think my high school is going to join the Big Ten next. But in this, just so everybody knows, Texas, where Wayland Baptist is from, and on this thing is in the Big 12 footprint, because I don't consider Texas an SEC school yet. Okay. And they're a Big 12 conference. So, guys, basically what this is saying is the SEC footprint is what the women's wrestling is. It's small, private, southern schools. Okay. Followed by the Midwest, small Midwest schools. And then, of course, Canada with Simon Fraser there. Now we go to the men's next. This should not surprise anybody.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is Simon Fraser the only school from Canada in this list?
Yes.
That's pretty interesting. That's one school. It's 8%.
Actually, hold on. I might have to pull up my list now. I got to figure out where Allie Bernard was on the cutoff because she made 2 Olympic teams at 12. I'm trying to think. She might have been on the cutoff because she wrestled. She was from Minnesota, from New Ulm, Minnesota, and she went north of the border and wrestled at Regina and Alberta in their system. So she won 5 national collegiate championships in Canada. So I think she might have been just off the cutoff here, but there have been wrestlers that are in the pipeline. Skylar Grote wrestled at Brock, which is just across the border in Canada. She's an example of one. There's been other wrestlers that have gone up there. It's not just Simon Fraser, but as far as I believe recent memory, I think Simon Fraser is the only school from this data set.
That is correct.
They're not the only athlete traditionally or historically that have been on a U.S. team that have went to a school outside of the U.S. because Brock has had a couple hammers that have been from the United States too, like Carlene Sublerski, for example. She wrestled up there too. So there's definitely options
in this data set.
But I don't think for this data set,
Simon Fraser is the only school, but as Jason says, there are other women wrestling in other schools there. Okay, so where do the men come from? Well, if you go to the NCAA tournament every year and listen to Jason and Brian, you'll realize it's Big Ten skewed. So Big Ten has the most, followed by the Big 12, and then there is an other category from all those other schools: North Dakota State, South Dakota State, UNI, Nebraska Kearney, etc. Um, okay, guys. So you see that. All right. Men come almost exclusively from NCAA Division One programs. Kevin, who's the only one that does it?
Uh, Delagnev from Nebraska
Yes.
Current. I can't remember,
Very.
but and what a great career he had as a. I think he made two Olympic teams and two world teams.
He
And
made a lot.
he made a lot. It's at least those four, and just an amazing athlete. I've watched some of his matches, and he's wrestling at 265, and he's hitting a John Smith low single. I'm watching him hit the John Smith low single, and just he had that kind of quickness, that kind of power, and so many matches I watched him where he came back in the second period and just wiped people out. It'd be 2-1 in the first period, and then he'd tech them early in the second period. Amazing athlete from Nebraska Kearney.
Thank you for that little bio on the one guy that wasn't a D1 kid for the men's side.
That's the only one I
On
know.
Yeah. On the women's side, it's pretty much dispersed between NCAA Division II, NAIA, and then girls that Jason mentioned wrestle for the RTCs or however they went and did it. So the women have many different paths there than the men do. Okay. Now, with that being said, the next slide, 16, is one path marketably better than the other path. Okay, since 2014, men have won 44 medals, women 35. Okay, statistically, that is an advantage on the men doing that. However, with women being a new sport, it's hard to say that the Division One path is better than the small private path at this time. We don't have enough to know that yet. But what it means is the United States is producing medalists for both sexes, which is really a great thing. Like we said, the Worlds are coming up in a couple weeks here, and then, of course, the Olympics next summer. But Kevin and Jason, give us some info on the medals and all that stuff.
Well, first thing I want to say, that little subliminal message you put in at the top. Watch 9/16/24 Serbia. Listen to Jason Bryant. I looking at this and I'm thinking I just was
Let's see.
watching. Go ahead.
World Championships, gold medals, knowledge by Kevin Hazard.
Okay.
The great Karnick.
Thank you very much. But interestingly enough, I know we're talking about college right now, but a lot of this is look at the under 20 that's going on right now. It was yesterday or the day before, we had 5 guys up, 5 guys go to the finals.
Semis.
Pretty amazing. I mean, part of this is, and we've gotten so much better. We are so much better at the under 17 and the under 20 than we were 20, 30 years ago. When I came through, I never even heard about Olympic wrestling. I mean, I heard about it, but it wasn't on TV. And I didn't wrestle my first freestyle match till I was in college. And, where these kids are doing it, my son was doing it at 8 years old. So it's a totally different ball game. We're so much better all the way from youth up. And I think that contributes to this, men and women.
Thank you for that.
Thankfully, too, we've got a set of rules now that changed in 2013 that now we're now a decade past. The binary code of wrestling, the 01-10-01 matches with the ball draws and such are gone.
Thank goodness.
So the opportunity to come back and wrestle a style, and again, we're talking strictly freestyle here. We haven't gone into Greco because a lot of the Greco medalists and such, their paths are not a whole lot of them are coming from Division One. They're going the Northern Michigan route or the Army WCAP or the training center. So you'll see pretty heavy placement or heavy representation from those 3 avenues. But when it comes to the style of wrestling, it's now more in line with 2-point takedowns up until we start wrestling 3-point takedowns in college this coming fall. We're not going to go there again. But the point is the style of wrestling is more kind of it embodies an American style of wrestling where good conditioning, heavy emphasis on takedowns, grind out. those type of things are beneficial at the international level. So we're seeing a shift back, maybe the coaches that shied away from this awful, ball draw era of wrestling, the dark ages of wrestling, to come back to where it resembles wrestling. That okay, those kids are coming through, and now there's also funding for these things. These things are funded by UWW better than they were prior. I mean, the best man at my wedding was on a '98 cadet world team, and it was not exactly the high profile event that it is now, because and I went to the Junior Worlds in 2012 before wrestling got kicked out of the Olympics, and it was not in a great facility. It was in Pattaya, Thailand. I mean, there's birds flying around on the inside, crapping on the mat. It was just there. They brought the age group worlds, or the cadet U17s back in 2011, I want to say, and the juniors were always there, but it's just like now they're a thing. They've added the U23s. It's just there's the system, there's a pipeline, there's a season, there's ranking series events. So it's more enticing to wrestle freestyle earlier now than it was when we had awful, awful rules.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you for that summation, guys. Now, the last thing we do in our show every month now is our famous Matt Kevin's notes. Instead of Cliff Notes, it's Matt Kevin's notes. Take it away for the top 10 things you learned in this show, Kevin Hazard.
Okay, number one, and as Jason very well put it at the start of the program, it's really great to have women's collegiate wrestling. Number two, right now, women come from predominantly private schools and men overwhelmingly from public schools. Number three, only one male who made a world team was not from an NCD1 program. It's Turvo Delagnev from Nebraska Kearney. Four, a Canadian college, Simon Fraser, and as we saw, 8% of the total Olympians or world members, is tied with King for the most entries on women's world and Olympic teams. Five, women come from a real mix of college organizations divisions. Okay, six, Big Ten dominates for men making the world Olympic team with the OSU. And again, this is the last 10 years with the OSU and Nebraska leading the way. I think we'll probably do something later where we'll take it back earlier, and I think we'll see a little shift in that. Seven, Cornell from the Ivy League has had three different male wrestlers make the world and Olympic teams, and that's all in the past 10 years. Since 2014, men have won 44 medals, and women have won 35. The men and women have two different paths, both producing success on the world stage. And 10, no college yet has had a man or a woman wrestle a match for their college that made world or Olympic teams.
Yes, thank you for that, Kevin. That's a summary of this show. Now, the next slide goes, what's the topic next month? Okay. The topic is going to be what colleges have teams, what colleges don't have teams, and what colleges might add teams. We're not going to get a specific thing saying that college might. It's going to be a big picture on the whole sport. It's basically a primer to let viewers know where our sport is going, where it is, how to measure success, and what to spend our time concentrating on. Kevin and Jason, you have anything else to say?
No, I thought this was interesting, and I think we need to revisit it and expand it and go back further. I like Jason's research, and we need to take some of that, and I think we've got a whole nother show out of this topic.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Agreed.
one thing about that is I was looking through the list last night, going back and looking at it, going, okay, wait a minute. I thought I was missing an athlete here and there, and I went back and started looking. And the first women's college wrestling program was at Minnesota Morris, that I believe launched in 1993 or 1994. And there's a number of wrestlers that started through that path. They may have ended up different places. Like Sarah McMahon, everybody associates her with Lockhaven. Well, she went to Minnesota Morris. Sally Roberts went to Morris. Marcy Van Dusen went to Morris. Tina George went to Morris. So there was a lot of those early pioneers that went through what's a Division III school that actually dropped men's and women's wrestling 2000 about 10 years later in 2003. So one of the early catalysts for women's college wrestling isn't even here anymore. So that's some interesting historical nuggets that I was digging after Glenn and I were sharing the information prior to recording the show. And I'm like, you know what? That's interesting. And another point to the next show is we look at, that's going to have to be like, we're going to have to put a disclaimer on that, because if we're going to have to record that a little bit early, because I'm going to be over in Serbia. So it's like, by the time we record that show, who knows, there could be probably more schools that add, because Randolph College, formerly known as Randolph-Macon Women's College, which went co-ed, I want to say in 2007, they announced last week men's and women's wrestling coming. That school's never had it. I mean, it was a women's college until, again, about 13, 14 years ago, if my math is accurate. It usually isn't. But, there's a school that the Wildcats, they've another Division III school in Virginia adding men's and women's wrestling. So there's growth. So when we release that show, who knows? There could be 5, 10 more schools added. Now, that might be a bit extreme, but there's going to be updates. And this also puts some historical pressure on me now to go through, like, I still got to find out when our high watermark was, because, again, we only have NCAA data starting in the 81-82 season. Still got to go through these stacks of amateur wrestling news is behind me and try to count things up. If I don't get to it, it's on the to-do list. Trust me.
I think I have a small window on what our high peak was with the data I have for the NCAA. But, of course, going back will help us with that. Guys, on behalf of Jason Bryant, Kevin Hazard, I'm Glenn Gormley, and we're signing off here at MatStats.